in the Lake Chad region, where climate change and shortages of water and food that come from it is becoming increasingly linked to conflict. The drastic shrinking of Lake Chad by more than 90% since the 1960s has led to environmental degradation, social economic marginalization and insecurity affecting 45 million people. Exacerbated competition over scant resources and the vicious cycle of risk and vulnerability have decreased the resilience of populations to cope with humanitarian crises. Declining economic activity and agricultural loss have led to a lack of employment opportunities across the region. The resulting socio-economic marginalization has exposed populations in the area, in particular the young people, to the risk of violent extremism and provided breeding ground for recruitment by groups such as Boko Haram.
Climate change affects peace and security in indirect but no less serious ways. In the Sahel and the Sudan, for instance, climate change has heightened competition for diminishing land, forage, and water resources, fueling tensions between herders and farmers. In the Lake Chad Basin, climate change contributes to unpredictable rainfall patterns that impede traditional livelihood options, compound socioeconomic exclusion, and reduce the opportunity costs of joining armed groups. Climate-related displacement has also become an acute problem. Frequent and longer droughts in Somalia have been a major factor in the displacement of more than 2.6 million people, which in turn have increased local tensions as well as human trafficking, child exploitation, and recruitment by armed groups.
The Boko Haram insurgency in northeast Nigeria and neighboring countries of Cameroon, Chad, and Niger has left over 10 million people displaced and resulted in massive destruction of basic infrastructure, health and educational facilities, commercial buildings, private houses, and agricultural assets. The United Nations believes the multidimensional nature of this crisis underlines the complex relationship between climate change and conflict.
Climate change is an aggravating factor. We call it a risk multiplier. Especially the Lake Chad region, I think this is an area where you have many different factors intersecting. So there's also a legacy of poor governance. There are certain agricultural policies that have been negative in the past. There's a big man-made dimension to the degradation of natural resources, and on top of that you have conflict and you have climate extremes. So it's I would say a very complex mesh of factors. And when you look at our programs in the Lake Chad region, a lot of it is still emergency related. So there are fires breaking out everywhere, you know, metaphorically. So people are in trouble in one part of the country here and another part of the country there. So we are caught in a pattern of repetitive humanitarian response. And it's very difficult in this context to establish a risk management approach to the crisis, which we would normally need. It's a bit easier to work in countries that do not have conflict. Countries like Malawi, for example, are easier to work with on risk management than, for example, DR Congo. And you know, middle-income countries have also certain capacities that least developed countries do not have. So every country is different. But in the Lake Chad Basin, I would say that climate change is a risk multiplier, like in many other places, but it's not a linear reason for that conflict.
In turn, high levels of poverty and low levels of human development limit the capacity of poor people to manage climate risks, placing further stress on already overstretched coping mechanisms that will perpetuate poverty traps. Taken together, this means the potential for an increase in eco-migrants, disease outbreaks such as the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, and increased instability. Perhaps most importantly, climate change is putting the lives of millions of people at risk in Africa. For the first time in over a decade, world hunger is on the rise, affecting 11% of the global population, according to recent estimates from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Conflict and climate are the main drivers for this spike in hunger.
Climate change is affecting every country, but countries that rely predominantly on agriculture feel it the most. Agriculture is all about climate-sensitive natural resources. It's about crops, it's about water, it's about livestock, it's about fish stock. And so if you have a country that relies 40 to 50% of their GDP on agriculture, then this is a very strong factor that determines vulnerability to climate extremes. And climate change can come in at the production side, where crops and livestock face heat stress, for example, so there are lower crop yields. But it can also come in after the production. So when, for example, storage systems are being disrupted, when access to market gets disrupted by flooding, by landslides. So in all stages of an agricultural value chain, climate change can come in and create a problem. And that overall also affects the food systems in countries, especially in those that rely on agriculture.
In Africa, crop destruction from the fall armyworm, strong droughts induced by an abnormally strong El Nino cycle, and a rise in conflict in places such as Nigeria, Somalia, and South Sudan were the chief culprit in a serious rise in food insecurity in 2017. At the peak of the El Nino crisis from 2014 to 2016, some 40 million people in Africa required emergency assistance. The number dropped to around 26 million in 2017.
I think a lot starts with communicating about the economics of climate change. So when you discuss with the Ministry of Agriculture how climate change affects food systems, food prices, it's good to have data. It's good to have economic data from the past, as much as what climate change models tell you about agriculture in the future. And then you need to link that data with money. It's eventually a big hit that Argentina is taking. It's a big hit that the US is taking through the storms. So everyone is affected, but unless you can translate it into US dollar figures, very often there is not enough attention on the issue.
As a designated financial mechanism of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Global Environment Facility continues to be at the forefront of international efforts to strengthen developing countries' resilience to climate change.
We came to realize that the projects that we are financing are good projects for the most part. They deliver generally the objectives that they were supposed to do, but they are not adding up. They are not helping to transform the systems that need transformation in order for us to reach these targets. So in this cycle, we developed a new policy through which we can bring resources closer together and start designing projects and programs that speak across different sectors and speak across different themes. So when you're talking about biodiversity, you have to talk about land use and how agriculture is taking place at the landscape scale. When you talk about emissions, we know that between 25 and 40% of all emissions today are due to deforestation added with agriculture. So without that, we won't achieve the results. So we decided to integrate more the financing that we provide.
The Global Environment Facility Small Grant Program successfully showed that community-based groups established to share common experiences and concerns about climate change lead to better and more resilient practices. But all too often, projects need trained, experienced, and motivated implementation staff for effective design and implementation of adaptation measures. Weak project planning, financial management, and reporting are other factors leading to implementation gaps.
LDCs have special needs and capacity. Sometimes it's not there. Of course, we work through accredited agencies, and they should know all the details on how applications work and what is eligible, what not eligible. But we also reach out to countries, and we have promoted what we call national dialogues, and we have also organized what we call extended constituency workshops, in which we bring our technical staff, we guide participants, which are different government agencies, NGOs, at the country level, to understand all these aspects. So we organize literally 3 or 4 of these a month now, everywhere in the world. We are, on the other hand, a very small unit. We are one secretariat housed in one place with 65 people.
Given that temperatures in Africa are rising and are set to rise faster than the global average during the 21st century, it is time to mainstream, scale up, and accelerate support for climate change adaptation across the continent. Recent studies indicate it is likely that the true cost of adaptation will be substantially higher than originally projected and require financial mechanisms that is creative and substantial engagement with the private sector to meet these challenges. That's our program for today. Thank you for being a part of it. Our inbox earthfile@channelstv.com is available for your comments and questions. You can also view this edition again on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/channelsweb. From me, Ayola Kasim, and the crew here in Lagos, it's bye for now.